Louis Satchmo Armstrong made popular a song called A Wonderful World. He said in one verse of this song, I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I say to myself, what a wonderful world. It is indeed a wonderful world. And when we look at our young people, especially our young people in the church, it gives us hope in these times that indeed we can have a wonderful world. It is a great thing that we have set aside this month to focus on our young people. Young people are special not only to us, but to God. The scripture says, what is hidden from the wise and prudent is made known to babes and sucklings. So, youths are very important to God. They're very important to us. And they indicate where this church is going in the future. And as much as we can invest in the lives of our young people, it will work for the greater honor and glory of God and for His kingdom. As I was growing up, as Irvin might say, when I was young, there was another song which said, they say the years twixt 12 and 20 are the years of confusion and doubt. And twixt 12 and 20 means between 12 and 20, the teenage years. But I'm addressing not only teenagers, but to all young people and all who are not so young, because in the eyes of God, we are all children. But somehow we identify these years, these youthful years, as troublesome years. And they are troublesome in so many ways. It's time when we begin to collect the baggage that accompanies us through life. You know what I'm talking about? You ever had to move out? Well, I shouldn't ask that question. I'm sure each one of us would have moved from one place to another. And then during that process, you come to realize the amount of baggage you've collected. And you wonder in your life, how did I get all of this? What am I going to do with all of this? Why, well, I'm in the process of that, and I can tell you the amount of baggage you collect, the amount of unnecessary things. We don't need all those things. And that's true in life. We collect so much baggage that we don't need to have. We accumulate and accumulate, and we weigh ourselves down with what is unimportant. And so often what is important goes unattended. We begin collecting that baggage from our youth. And so young people, be careful of the baggage you collect. It's only going to weigh you down. Very early in our lives, we begin to wonder what we will become as we grow older. Our parents have grandiose plans for us. In my days, the ideal was to be a lawyer or a doctor. And everybody wanted their children to become lawyers and doctors. And over the years, I've come to realize how sad that really was. Because nobody ever wanted their children to become preachers or pastors. No, nobody, because, they felt pastors and preachers didn't work enough money. But lawyers and doctors They've got it all. Sad. But very early, young people come to start wondering, what am I going to become? What do I want to be? And very often, we want to fulfill the desires of our parents. And so we set goals sometimes which might be unachievable, so many times not in our best interest. We forget that in all of this, God also has a plan. The scriptures tell us that God has a plan for us. In Jeremiah chapter 29, that popular verse that we all know, 29:11, God speaking through the prophet Jeremiah says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." And yet at that young age, we start worrying about the future, what we're going to be and how we're going to achieve this. But God has a plan for you. And I want you to remember that God has a plan for you. It's not only about your plan for yourself or your parents' plan for you, but that God has a plan for you. Good thing about God having a plan is that it's not just a plan, there's a purpose behind God's plan. I want to look at the book of Exodus, the life of a man called Moses, and see how God has a plan. In Exodus chapter 3, we read the story of Moses encountering the burning bush. And as he approached this burning bush, the angel of the Lord spoke to him and said, "Now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." So there's a purpose in God's plan. He planned all this thing about Moses, and you know the story, I don't have to go into details. But he had a purpose. He brought Moses where he was at that point in time as part of his purpose. It was not just a mere accident. He had a purpose. And when God has a purpose, God also provides the potential to fulfill that purpose. As we continue in Moses, we look at chapter 4, and I'm reading from verse 1. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." So God gives us the potential to fulfill his purpose. And sometimes it's just what we have in our hands. That staff, as you know, was a staff that Moses used to perform an incredible number of miracles. God provided that. But Moses, like so many of us, was still very doubtful. So he came back to God. Verse 10, he says, Moses said to the Lord, "O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." So, God has a plan. There's a purpose in God's plan, and God gives us the potential to carry out that plan. And as young people, you need to remember this. The question should not be, what am I going to be, really? But it should be, what does God want me to be? What does God want me to be? You see, fulfilling God's plan is much more important than fulfilling your own plan. Your plan is going to end up in frustration. Believe you me, you might accomplish many things. You'll collect a lot of baggage. But at the end of it all, it will all be rubbish. Without God, you will achieve nothing. So in this whole process, God created the environment of the home. When each child grows up in a home, unfortunately, some are not so privileged, but God created the environment of a home. And I see that home as a nursery which fosters the growth and development of a child. God didn't just make us drop from trees. He created the environment of a home. And in that home, children grow up. They're fed, they're taken care of so that they grow. Babies, after a while, begin to creep around. Then they begin to walk around and create all sorts of havoc in the house. But it's where they grow, where they develop, and where we nurture them, we care for them. And I dare say there is not a parent here who would not willingly sacrifice his life for his child. Jesus said, which father among you would give his child a snake if he asks for a fish? We go to all extremes to provide for our children. I remember my father wearing patches. You don't know about patches. But his clothes was patched up so that he could work to provide for us. And I dare say that the parents in here would willingly do the same thing for their children. The home is also the place where a child develops emotionally. The child is exposed to love and caring. And hopefully the child will begin to learn to love and to care for others. It is true that in some homes this is deficient, but this is not God's plan. God's plan is that the child should develop emotionally as well as physically. One area that we often forget is that the home is the place where the child is meant to develop spiritually. We have to teach children about God, about His love. We have to teach them about salvation. And God imposes this responsibility on fathers because fathers are the head of the household. And it's a great responsibility and a grave responsibility, I might say, that fathers have. In Deuteronomy chapter 11, Moses is speaking to the children of Israel, and he is at the point of concluding his ministry, and he's reminding them of all that God has done for them from the time he brought them out of Egypt. In chapter 11 and verse 19, he's saying to them and addressing the fathers, teach them to your children. He's talking about the commandments of God. He says, teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. In other words, always talk to them about God. Teach them what God has done. Teach them what God requires. This is the responsibility of fathers. You and I know that this hardly happens today. In many homes, fathers shirk their responsibility. In Ephesians chapter 6, We read verses 1 to 3, talking about the responsibilities of children. Hey, but the responsibilities of a father, Paul reminds them, he says in verse 4, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." Fathers have this responsibility. And yet so often, fathers antagonize their children. So often, there is a rivalry in the household where there should be peace and love. Fathers are often deficient in what they should do. Proverbs chapter 22. And verse 6 says, that famous verse that we all rely on, and we depend on, and we trust God that it is really true. "Train up the child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it." I tell you, many of us hang on to that verse. I, for one, hang on to that verse. That in the end, God will bring our children where they need to be. So, fathers have a grave responsibility, something that they cannot shirk. The responsibility to create the right environment in the home for the child to grow and develop, not only physically, but emotionally and spiritually as well. But before you know it, this growing process brings us to what we call young people, the youth. A time of self-discovery and sometimes a time of self-determination. We begin to discover ourselves. We decide what we want to be and who is going to be the boss. It's a difficult time for young people because hormones are kicking in. Desires are springing up. On the one hand, you want independence, but on the other hand, you have to depend on parents, and you're caught in this tug of war. It's not an easy time. It's a difficult time. Among the questions you ask yourself as young people is, who am I? Who am I really? Do you know who you really are? If I ask Marcus this morning, who are you? Do you think he can truly answer me? I ask you this morning, who are you? Do you know who you are? Marcus might be a son, but is that all Marcus is? He's also a brother, but is that all he is? He's a friend. I hope so, to someone. But is that all he is? Is he any of those? Or is he all of those? Is he all of those and something more? Who is Marcus? And who are you? Do you know? There's another aspect of that. I might think Marcus is so-and-so. But is that who Marcus is? Is Marcus the person I think him to be? Are you the person I think you are? Do you know? Another aspect of that. Who do you want me to think you are? Are you the person I think you are? Or do you want me to think you are someone else that you might not be? You see how confusing it could get? And then again, there's the other question. do you really know who I am? Because you can project an image which you want me to believe in. I might have an opinion of who you are, but then neither of those could be correct. You might be someone totally different. And all of this might just be a charade. Who are you really? And of course, what would you truly like to be? So how do you define who you are? You see how complicated that question can be? And young people have to go through this. Who am I really? How do you know who you are? I think the simplest thing to do is to go to your maker, the person who made you. He is the one who must know you more than anyone else. You don't think so? He is the one who should know you more than anyone else. Psalm 139 takes us there. Beginning at verse 1. O Lord, you have searched me, and you know me. You have searched me, and you know me. Even when I don't know myself, you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. Imagine that. By the time you think something, this God knows, because he knows you in a way that no one else knows you. You discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways. Which parent here can say that they're familiar with all the ways of their children? I'm sure you wouldn't put your head on a block for that. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. Such knowledge. Let's go on to 13. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. So this is the God who truly knows you. He knows you before you were actually born. So if I want to know who I am, where do I go? I go to this God who knows me. And young people, this is where you need to go when you're agonizing over that question, who am I really? Because you don't really know. It is only God who really knows. The scripture says that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are God's unique creation. There is no one else like you, and God made you. Another question you will face is, where am I going? Where am I going in this life? And before you know it, you begin to have ambitions. You know, you desire certain things very strongly. You want to achieve something in this life, not just drift along. There are those who want to drift along, but they're not here today. You desire to achieve something. You have what we say ambition. And every parent is proud of a child who has ambition, because it is something that fuels you as you drive through life. You've got ambition. And sooner or later you will begin to set goals. Oh, mom wants me to become a lawyer, dad wants me to become a doctor, but I want to be an engineer. You have your own goals. The things you want to achieve, you set your mind on achieving. The things you will expend your effort towards in achieving. And hopefully, by God's grace, you will achieve success. That aim, that ambition in life will be realized. But as you consider where you're going and all of these ambitions, I want to ask you, what is it that defines these ambitions? How are they defined? How do you come to decide what is it you want to be? What influences you? Is it your family? Is it the community? We would like many of you to become pastors. I'm sure our pastor would love that very much. Every church that grows, that comes into being, pastors want so many of their young people to get into the ministry. We don't always have that dream fulfilled. But what is it that influences your ambition? Is it your community? Is it the society in which you live? You look around and you see doctors making heaps of money, and you decide, well, look, that's the way I should go. Is that what fuels your ambition? Or is there a worldview that influences you? And many of you in high school and in university come under the pressure of this worldview. It conditions your goals, conditions your thinking, if you allow it to. What is it that really defines where you're going? Another question after you've asked yourself, where am I going, is how do I get there? How am I going to get there? For many people, this whole idea of where I want to go and how I get there is influenced by forces outside of them. We allow the pressures of the society in which we live, the group with which we hang out, to influence our thinking and our goal. And young people in particular, they come under what we call peer pressure. You know, the pressure that your friends exert on you. Everybody is doing this, so I must do it if I want to hang out with the crowd. And so often you get yourself into serious problems because of this. Sometimes the society in which you live, the country in which we live, the thinking of that country influences your decision. There was a saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans, and many of us follow in that tradition. But I want you to know that choices have consequences. Whatever choice you make, there are consequences. All right. There's an old proverb which says that your chickens come home to roost. You ever heard that? Your chickens come home to roost. They always come back home. You probably don't know about chickens in the yard, but where we come from, you let your chickens out in the morning, and at night, they come straight back home to the pen. Your chickens come home to roost. Your choices have consequences, and before long, they'll catch up with you. The Bible says, be sure your sin will find you out. So your chickens come home to roost. Paul says, be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, he will also reap. And young people need to understand that what you sow, you will reap. It will come back home. The baggage that you begin to collect, you're going to have to carry it. Solomon had some very good advice. I just want to look briefly at that in Proverbs chapter 3. He says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart. For they will prolong your life many years and bring you prosperity. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke. Because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son he delights in." Great advice. And I will urge young people to follow that advice, to seek the Lord, to listen to what he has to say, and allow him to guide you. The preacher in Ecclesiastes, after he had spent his life exploring all the various areas of life and doing all sorts of things that he felt he needed to do, he came to this conclusion. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandment, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. So your chickens will come home to roost. Choices have consequences. You cannot escape from that. If you allow God to guide and to influence your decisions and your choices, then you can expect the goodness that God has promised. How does all of this operate in real life? We've talked a lot of principles, but how does it operate in real life? There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to the father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that city, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But he was still a far way. But while he was a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him." And we'll stop there for today. We refer to this young man as the prodigal. And this is one of, to me, the greatest stories in the Bible. It is a story that each one of us can relate to. I certainly can relate to this. The prodigal, the one who went out looking for his own way. He said to his father, "Give me my share." And you imagine this Jewish household. The father obviously was a man of substance, and he would have kept the Jewish law. He would have made every attempt to teach his children what they needed to do. And so with all of this training and all of this good upbringing, here is this young man saying to his father, "Give me my share." What is this father going to do? In a typical Jewish household, that question would never, ever arise. No child would be brave and bold enough to come to his father with such a request, especially the younger of two sons. But here he was, coming to the father. And we can see in this a father who loved and who cared, who was willing to bend over for his child, as many of you are. But a day might come when the child will make a request which breaks your heart. And what do? When the son comes, he would have taken note of everything that was going on. He knew what his father was worth, or pretty close to what his father was worth. He had his friends out in the community. He would have heard what they were saying. And so often, they would have influenced him in this decision. He didn't just dream this up like that. He was exposed to an environment which imposed certain things on him. In the same way you are. You're exposed to an environment that your parents cannot even fathom. You have the internet and you have all sorts of things. The information you have at your disposal, your parents wouldn't even dream of that kind of information. You have all of this, and they all influence you in the choices that you make. So here was this young man coming to his father, having given consideration to all the information that he received from his friends, and saying to his father, "Give me my share." He made a choice. How many parents face this situation today? Barbara Streisand sang a song in which there are these words: "If I could, I would try to shield your innocence from time. But that part of life I gave you isn't mine. I watched you grow so I could let you go." And this is the sentiment of many parents. Whether we like it or not, our children are going to go. We're not going to hang on to them all the time. Sooner or later, they will go. And sometimes it's heartbreaking when they go because of the manner in which they go. But this is the reality of life. The most you can do as parents is to ensure you give them the right instructions. Teach them, love them. But you've got to be prepared that one day they will go. So here's this young man coming to his father. "Father, let me go. Give me my share and let me go." So we are told the father divided his property and gave him what was his. And he left, and he went to a distant country. And we can just imagine him traveling down the road, going as far away as possible from his father. Isn't that heartbreaking? That the father who would have given so much now becomes like an enemy. And sometimes this is exactly what our children do. They head off in a direction that brings us so much pain. He went to a distant country. And I want you to see this distant country in two planes. One, it could be this place where he went to, the place of anonymity. Nobody knows him, because what he intends to do is not something that he will want his father to know. So he goes to a place where nobody knows him. He becomes lost in the crowd so he can do whatever he wants to do. You don't think your children will do that, will you? You better be prepared for that. Because sometimes they want to get so far away from you because they don't want you to see what they will do. Many of you still have your children here with you, but you don't know what they do when they go to school. And let me tell you, when they're at school, they're a different person from the one you know at home. And you better believe that. So here he was, heading off to a distant country. Nobody knows him there, so he could do whatever he wanted to do. He was not going to be accountable to anyone. And that is a state that many of us would like to be in. We don't have to account to anyone. Wouldn't you like to be in that state? Yeah. So he goes to this distant country where he is not going to be known. He wouldn't have to account to anyone. Nobody can tell him what time he should get back home. There's no curfew. Nobody can tell him who he has to hang out with. He can hang out with wherever and whoever he wants. And in his mind, that is a place of freedom. He is free. There are no boundaries, no rules, no regulations. He is free at last. There's another plane to this matter of the distant country. It's the plane of disconnect. You know, you disconnect from someone. Some people come to church and they disconnect. Pastor's up here preaching his heart out, and they're dreaming about lunch and way after lunch. That state of disconnect. Your mind is somewhere else. That state where self takes over. Don't bother with what he is saying. Self is on the throne. I am in charge of this. So here was this young man. He's in charge now. No daddy there to tell him what he could do and what he could not do. He's in charge. He is in control. And so many of us are control freaks. We want to be in control. He has his opportunity now. He's in charge. He's in control. This state of disconnect is that state where our God-given potential is misused and misdirected. What God has put in you is now used not for God's purpose, but for your own purpose, because you have assumed control. That state of disconnect. It is a state of mistaken freedom, because don't ever believe you will not give an account. You might deceive yourself, delude yourself that you will not give an account, but you will have to give an account at some point in time. And freedom, true freedom, is not an absence of rules and regulations. Rather, it's the presence of rules and regulations. You know, Jesus said, when he was talking about the world, he said there are two gates, two roads. Enter in at the straight gate, because wide is the gate that leads to destruction. That talks about regulations. It's not a total absence of rules. It is the presence of rules. It is there that you can truly be free. Do you imagine the chaos that will take place if there were absolutely no rules? If I figure, well, I could drive on the left-hand side of the road and you figure you can drive on the right-hand side of the road, what do you think is going to happen? So rules are necessary for an orderly society. And we serve a God who is a God of order. So freedom is not the absence of rules. It is operating within the rules of God. So he goes off to this distant country, and as you know, he went there for a special purpose, and before you know it, he squandered his wealth in wild living. What else do you think he wants to run away from his father for? To live a holy life, to go to church, to go to seminary? Oh, way. Many young people don't want to go to university in New York State because they have to come back home each day. They want to go out of state. You know why they want to go out of state? You think they got better education out there? No. They got more freedom. They can do what they want to do. Nobody to tell them when to come home. And you should hear the stories in some of those universities. So he goes and he squanders his wealth in wild living, pursuing the sensual, the things you want to feel, the feel-good part of life. You want that. I always remember Nike and their slogan, you know, if it feels good, do it. So they head out to the distant country to do it. When I was growing up, there was a philosophy that when you're young, you should enjoy life. So, you know, there wasn't a pressure to go to church and, you know, live a righteous kind of life when you're young. Go out and enjoy life. When you get old, then you creep in the church. Yeah. But God only wants old people. You know? But that was the philosophy we had at that time. He squandered his wealth in wild living. Aesop tells us a story about an ant and a grasshopper. The ant, as you know, is a very industrious insect. Stores up food throughout the year. You look at ants, they're always busy. And what they do, they collect food and they take it to the nest and they store it up. Grasshopper, on the other hand, he hops around from here, he hops there, he hops all over the place. So winter came. All the food around was frozen out. Nothing to eat. Grasshopper now gets hungry. Can't find food. So he comes up to the ant and he says, you know, I'm hungry, give me something to eat. The ant says, well, what were you doing all summer? He says, well, you know, I was dancing around here and there and there. You know, I was singing and dancing and, you know, I was hopping from here to there. So the ant says, well, sorry, but since you were singing all summer, go and dance all winter. And this is what happens when we squander what we have. You waste it out while living, you know, you fetting everybody. And this is why you want to go to the far country, use up the hard-earned money that your parents gave to you to fet your friends. And you do a lot of this thing because of popularity. You want a desire for popularity. You know, you want to be popular, you want people to like you, and sometimes some of us spend a lot of money trying to get people to like us. Young people, this would be a great temptation. You'd want people to like you, you want to hang out with a certain crowd, and it might cost you a lot of money. In my day, there was a popular saying to young men, do right and fear no man. Don't right and fear no woman. You know? And that was something that guided young men a lot because, you know, you don't want to write love letters with certain commitments and send it out to women. Today, you're not writing, you're texting. So young men, be careful of what you text because they store all those things in their phones. And that could be held as evidence against you. Young women, in particular, be careful about unequal yoking. You know, you want this particular star, and you would do anything for that star. You don't care about his manner of living. You don't care what he thinks, where he's going, where he's headed. This is the one you want. This unequal yoking is a serious problem for our young people. And you're going to face it so often because the people you might become attracted to are not necessarily the best people for you. And I'm particularly sympathetic to our young women where this is concerned because we've seen so many broken marriages because young women made the wrong choice. But I've got a word for you, young women. There are two things in life you don't run after. One is the bus. The second is a man. Right? Don't run after a bus or a man. There is always another one coming. But this drift into the distant land, this distant country, is not always a sudden plunge. It's not always a sudden thing. Sometimes it's drawn out. It's a gradual slide. You make little compromises along the way. And before you know it, you find yourself in that distant country. Be careful of compromises. Wherever you begin to make compromises, you're changing your situation, you're changing your position. And if you continue making compromises, before you know it, you will find yourself where you never planned to be. Do not allow the crowd to influence you to that extent where you have to compromise your standards. It never works out in the long run. For many of you who have encouraged that type of compromise, you find yourself going through the motions, as it were. You come to church and you sit in the pews, but it's just going through the motions. There is no connect. Be careful, young people. It can happen to you. So he went to this far country. He squandered his wealth, and as you would expect, he began to be in want. Back home, we used to say, Pastor, money done, fun done. Right? Money done, fun done. Everybody he knew who used to hang out with him, they've gone now because the money is done. Look at your outflow and your income. If your outflow is greater than your income, money must done. So before long, he had to go to get work. The not working millionaire becomes a pauper. He goes to a citizen of that country who sent him to his farm to feed pigs. Now for you and I, that might not be a disgraceful job, but for a Jew, that definitely was not kosher. So here he was feeding pigs. And the question must have come to him, how low can I fall? How low has he really fallen to feed pigs? And that's a question we should consider. How low can I really fall? I tell you, you can fall as low as it takes for God to get your attention. And that was what was happening to him there. He fell right down to the lowest. And that was when God got his attention. Because he was hungry, he was starving, he was on the verge of dying. Then he begins to hear. The scripture says he came to his senses. And so sometimes we wonder in our situation, how low can I fall? I tell you, you better look at your life, because God allows you to fall as low as possible so that he can get your attention. It happens all the time. Jonah found that out, you remember? God sent him this way, he went that way. Hid himself until the fish swallowed him. There in the belly of the fish, he turned to this God he was running away from. And many young people do that. You want to run away from God because you figure what God wants you to do is not what you want to do. God is in control and I want to be in control. God will bring you down to that place where you begin to hear his voice. There's a song which says, what if the trials of this life are your mercies in disguise? So look at the trials you're facing. Sometimes they're trials which are meant to bring your attention to God. So here was God shouting to him now. No more silent voice, no more quiet voice, but God was actually shouting to him. Look what you've come to. The scripture says, he came to his senses. He came to his senses. How did I get here? How did I get here? Thank God he did come to his senses. Choices, we said earlier, have consequences. He made certain choices, and he found himself in the pig pen. And so, young people, what choices are you making in life? What choices are you making? You've come to the place where your parents can't make choices for you anymore. You're making choices. What influences your choice? Where are you headed? Choices have consequences. The songwriter goes on to say, what if my greatest disappointments on the aching of this life is the revealing of a greater thirst this world cannot satisfy? This young man found himself in a situation where he realized that the world was not going to bring him satisfaction. And if you pursue a course that leads to the world, this will be your end as well. You will find that the world will not satisfy you. The things in this world that you pursue will become like sawdust in the end. Yes, they might give you pleasure for a season, but in the end, you'll be disappointed. A good thing about this young man is that having gone through this experience, having come to his senses, as we all need to do, come to our senses, the scriptures tell us that he got up and he went to his father. Many times we have good intentions, but we do not carry through on those intentions. There are many young people who have gone astray, who have heard the voice of God calling them. They have fallen to that place where they're feeding pigs. They've come to their senses, but yet they refuse to go back home. Good intentions without action mean nothing. There's a saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So, when you come to your senses, head back home to the Father. This is where life truly is enjoyable. This is where the fullness of life is. It is in the kingdom of God, in the household of God. And we see from this story that as he got up from the pig pen, he headed up the road, and his father was there looking, waiting for him. And he received a warm welcome home. I want to tell you that wherever you are in your walk in life, Jesus is waiting to welcome you home. You may have strayed, and you may still be in the pig pen, but he's still waiting for you to come to your senses and to come back home. If you're out there in that distant country, heed the call. Come to your senses. Come back home to the Father. He's there waiting for you. You may have all the excuses. He doesn't want the excuses. He just wants for you to come back home. Come to your senses. Young people, not so young people, wherever you are in your walk in life, come to your senses and come back home like this prodigal son. Pastor.